Hello and welcome to Municipal Matters here on your TV. I'm your host, York Bellsmith, and we're joined on this episode by Cobourg Mayor John Henderson. John, once again, thank you so much for joining us, taking the time to do this. I'll ask you the first question. How are you holding up since the last time we chatted, especially now that the heat started to rise?
Well, each day's been an active day. I don't think I'm any different from any member of first responders or the emergency control group or staff or police service. I think we're all active, and each day, as I indicated, is a new day. And it's ironic because I know we're having a conversation today, but I felt like we just had one yesterday. So time is moving on.
Yeah, it certainly is. Absolutely. Some things that are starting to move on is there's more openings that the province is allowing to happen, although this coming in the past week or so with a steady increase in cases until a drop today. So how is the town reacting to this? Like, what amenity and facilities are open and what is closed still in the town of Cobourg?
Okay, perhaps if I could do a quick run through. Um, Although we've opened, I want to be clear that this is to be in alignment with the provincial regulations. It was certainly in Regulation 10420, which amended a lot of recreational facilities. If our town decides that we can open those honorably and fairly in alignment with the health board, then our job is to do so. So based on that, at this point, the boat launch is open. As we know, we spoke last week about community gardens. Similarly, Council did pass a motion to allow the ecology gardens and those operating the Cobourg Lawn Bowling Club to do maintenance only through that special motion. As I've shared with you last week, Council also passed a motion on May 23rd to allow the operation of the farmers market under the e-commerce model. They had their first active session this past weekend, and my understanding they're going to work out any gap analysis that they're finding to continue to work in that fashion. With that being said, however, sport fields are available, whether you say basketball, baseball, soccer pitches, but I need to emphasize there appears to be some confusion. These are meant as individuals. So for example, if my family decide to go out, enter that field and take a soccer ball, we decide to kick it around, that is permissible. However, if I'm a coach of a team and I call my team out to practice or for any form of organized activity, that is not permissible. So we're still in the individual framework in the use of those fields. Similarly, we opened up the dog park this past Saturday. And as you know, we've opened up benches, shelters, picnic areas. So let me give you an example. A week ago, we were encouraging before this amendment come out for you to move through our parks and our beaches. But with these new regulations, what it states clearly, as long as you're honoring fiscal and social distancing, you're able to have a picnic. Thus, you could have a picnic in Victoria Park, but you could also have one on Victoria Beach. And it's this that has caused the concern, as you mentioned, as the nice weather comes, the concern is the arrival of individuals who now, under the Act, have been allowed to partake in these kind of amenities. As well, we note that tennis, pickleball, we're working on. Again, when I say we're working on, that means we're garnering the information, for example, from Tennis Canada, down to the clubs, down to the emergency control group, working with our health unit to ensure that what we indicate that the I's can be dotted and the T's can be crossed, and then we can create the manner for them to operate. The other part sometimes are extended. Premier indicated that boats could go in the water, I believe, as of May 1st. But for us having the marina, that is a lot of extensive work, a lot of policy development, a lot of changes coming forward. So at this point, the target date for that is June 13th. So you can see in some cases, We cannot be in compliance with what the premier states because we just cannot move that quickly to ensure that everything's in order.
So you mentioned, people can come and picnic in Victoria Park and sit down on the beach as long as they observe all the social distancing, physical distancing rules. We
Right.
saw, though, with the good weather, what happened this past weekend in Bellamy Park in Toronto. What are your fears that something like that could happen here? I mean, there's no doubt about it. Our waterfront is a huge attractor to many, many visitors each and every year.
Yes, first of all, I'm familiar with the park in Toronto, and it's a rather massive park. My understanding they had about 10,000 participants. I don't think we would certainly be at that range, but your point is well taken. We all know that we're a magnet, both for Cobourg, Northumberland, and perhaps the GTA, as evidenced by this past weekend when I met with bylaw officers. They indicated, give or take on Saturday, between 200 and 300, being very respectful, but at the same time, that's still 200 or 300. And we
Right.
know, based on past performances, even though council made a motion to cancel all community events to September 1st at this point, that still does not stop at this point someone determining, as is today, it's a beautiful day and I'd like to go down to the beach. So that will become certainly our point of discussion at council on Monday night, because all of council, including myself, is trying to find a balance of being respectful, uh, being open, I guess, to civil liberties, and yet at the same time being very protective of COVID-19 to our own citizens. So my answer will be a healthy debate come Monday night for that very reason.
And have we beefed up our force of bylaw enforcement officers that are out there to handle this? We're going to have consecutive good weekends coming up.
Well, we have one thing council did. Mr. David came before council, asked for a redeployment of staff. Uh, that was passed by council in a motion. I believe we have 3 additional added on the redeployment. And of course, they work in conjunction in a very wonderful manner with Chief Vandegraff and what he's able to put forward in terms of auxiliary or special constables. We're very fortunate that we have that kind of working relationship. So my answer to you is, has it been enhanced? The answer is absolutely yes. Is it been enhanced at the level if we had a situation like in Toronto? My answer would be absolutely not, because that would be beyond, in my belief, the capacity of the expectations that we have at hand.
Right. Talk to us a little bit about that relationship between the town, the police, the bylaw officer, and everybody working together. I mean, that's very evident when you see people talking about it and themselves, and sort of everybody supporting each other through this.
Well, it's an example, again, I want to credit the chief. It's an example of the board itself, the Cobourg Police Services Board, supporting what we call tiered policing, working those elements of the auxiliary and special constables. Again, I want to emphasize, not doing the high-end jobs of a police officer, but being able to help in such things like bylaw enforcement, mentoring, educating, promoting. Um, it really pays dividends, because if you could imagine, if, and I'm not against officers when I say this in any way, but if you had to pay a police officer to do every one of those tasks, we simply could not afford, I don't think, to do so. So it is a wonderful model. I know it's a model that the chief is sharing through other parts of the province, and we in Cobourg get the benefit of that kind of cooperation. And I must say the cooperation just doesn't lie there. It continues with St. John's, it continues with EMS, it continues with our Cobourg Fire Department. They really are a team working for the betterment of Cobourg.
I think we have a pretty incredible team here of frontline workers. When you talk EMS, the police, fire department, the staff at the hospital, grocery store clerks. I mean, people still lining up to get into the grocery store. I think a lot has to be said for them and to them as to the great job that they've been doing.
Oh, absolutely. If I could hand out gold stars or fireworks, it would be going to all of them. They just have been simply a collective, collaborative effort, always, I believe, with the best interest of the community at heart.
Have you seen a marked difference in foot traffic downtown over the past, well, so let's just say since the last time you and I had a conversation here?
I would have to say I've seen an enhanced traffic presence. To me, the foot traffic has remained steady, but please remember the one promising news from COVID is that people are walking more, they are biking more. So that for me is like the new norm, but I have not seen it to the point where perhaps the trust, the confidence is there yet to say, yes, I'm going to actually enter that store under their new mandate. I think that will come as confidence is gained and as citizens see what each owner is doing within their own business.
And that's a struggle that people weren't really thinking about when all this started, is getting back into this. When does that confidence come back, and what is it going to take to get the consumer confidence back to feel safe actually going inside to any of these businesses?
Yeah, and I can't answer that because, again, we've not been through a pandemic. We've not been through this experience. But I would have to hope if an owner took all considerable um, parameters under public health safety guidelines, I'm hoping either through an appointment or through small steps that facet can return, because that's not only helpful perhaps to the individual who's doing something, but again helps to start us on our road to economic recovery.
Right, absolutely. Now, you mentioned everything, all town sponsored events canceled until at least September 1st. There's still lots of talk about a second wave, and now they're even starting to talk about a second spike during this first wave. Do you have a time frame as to when you're going to start looking at events past September 1st?
I don't know, I would only think we're going to meet on a regular schedule. We've gone this time back to a regular schedule and we'll continue to do so for council. So I would expect we would have those conversations in August, if not earlier, depending on what information comes forward from Mr. Davey and the emergency control group. So I'd like to think it would be 4 to 6 weeks in advance. So again, we're not waiting to the last moment to make important decisions.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely not. This has had a financial impact on the town. We're going to get to that when we come back after the break as Municipal Matters continues here on your TV. Welcome back to Municipal Matters here on your TV. I'm your host, York Belsmith, along with Cobourg Mayor John Henderson. John, we mentioned just before the break, financial issues that are going to come up with this. It's an expensive thing to go through. So there was a special finance meeting to review finances. Talk to us about how that went.
Well, first of all, I want to give kudos to Mr. Davey and his team in the financial department. I thought what they put together through the various schedules, knowing what they know at this time, because a lot of things are up in the air, because again, we've never been faced with this kind of determination. I thought did an admirable presentation to council. And the summary of all of that at this point is we're probably looking at 1.5 million at this point. We know that will continue in an upward trend as we move into August, closer to the fall. So it's certainly going to mean, and I want to emphasize this, a lot of individuals think we take our budget and we call it a budget and tear apart the budget. But I have to emphasize our council's already passed the budget. The taxes and amounts have already been sent out. So what this is really a financial overview to give us a temperature, a barometer of what's happening, why it's happening, the amounts. And as we know, when we move in the evolution of the budget for next year, of course, as any municipality, we have to balance the budget. We're not allowed to run a deficit. So through this time, we'll learn what is happening in terms of PPE, which is personal protective equipment, or the use of plexiglass, or the use of staff needs, the use of ITs, physical structures. All those listings will be incorporated. And then we'll have to measure on the other end as we move forward, what areas do we look at perhaps in cutting to a very different budget moving forward to ensure, again, that we're respectful of the tax base during these very challenging and difficult times, and make the right decisions that we have to make moving forward. So I see really tough decisions coming in the future, but right now it's giving us that thermometer moving forward of what that might look like.
Any idea of projected cost to the taxpayers?
Well, I'm hoping it will personally be somewhat minimal, because I'm hoping through the wisdom of council, things that we would take for granted, let's say in a capital project, we wouldn't even hesitate about doing it. I think in the future, we may then, if it's been predicted, we may then say, wow, that's nice, but not during these times, and removing that completely, or amending it or extending it, whatever council wishes to do. And that's where the tough decisions are going to come in. I think we realize that we have to treat next year's budget totally different than any other budget I would like to believe in past going forward. And we're going to have to look at capital projects totally differently as we move forward. And we realize that during these challenging times, we're going to have to be very careful collectively what we do take to the tax base, because I can't name anybody who's not been affected by COVID-19.
Is there any measures in place, or are there measures that could be put in place to try and curb the loss to the town financially, or the financial hit?
Well, we've done a few things. Based on our first review, we took 10 items out of the I won't say out directly, but we took 10 capital items. And at this point, we just deferred them. In other words, we'll see how things play out. We'll see how grant money comes in, if it doesn't come in. But we're deferred them to the point that we're interested still in ensuring that the designs are done, that the initial input is done. Because as we know, if we don't keep up with that, and times change, and let's say the government comes out with a grant or a loan, and they're not prepared, then we just lost all that opportunity. So as council, we agreed we would put that money, we would use that money going forward, but for everything else, it's kind of in a holding pattern at this time. And similarly, we did 3 things. I'm looking at my notes. Major projects, then that would be Abbott Sidewalk, Terry Fox Stormwater Pond, and the bridge culvert work. And each of those projects come with 6-digit figures. And so right now we're saying, hey, if that doesn't have to happen, doesn't come to be, well, we can easily decide later on as council that we're not going to continue, at least for the next year or so, in those determinations. Again, council has the right to add on, as we look at 2021 budget, the right to decline, the right to remove, the right to amend. And I believe that will be done like no other budget at that time. And by that time, Mr. Davey should have an ongoing figure presented to council. In fact, we've asked him to pick a date, July, so that we can do this again. We want to have the thumb on the pulse, or the blood pressure, or if you would say, as this moves forward, just where are we and what does this look like and what does it mean for the town of Cobourg?
So this will become a regular monthly or more frequent if needed update?
Yeah, I would say we did one in May, and I would say July, and obviously we'd be doing one in September. So I would sense, unless council chooses otherwise, I would like to think every other month would be reasonable to collect enough metrics. And I use the example that right now, just in the change of the facilities, Mr. Davies predicting $100,000. And my answer is right now, that's a really good guess, because we don't know if that's low, that's high. It's a ballpark figure based on the size of our different facilities. But as we move through the months, we should have a more precise figure as to, well, what did the plexiglass cost us? Well, what did the reconstruction of the counters? Well, what did the staffing overtime? Well, what did ordering the PPE equipment? all these things will come into play because they'll each come attached with a dollar figure.
Right. Now you mentioned, and most people know that municipalities and towns aren't allowed to run a deficit. Has there been any talk with the province about maybe that being eased off going forward? I mean, every municipality and town in the province is going through exactly the same thing.
Well, at this point, the good news, there is a great deal of collaboration between the bigger organizations known as FCM, which is Federation of Canadian Municipalities, representing all municipalities across Canada. Then you have what I consider our very own AMO, which is the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, of which there are 444 municipalities, of which Cobourg is one. And we, along with, I must say, unions, many unions have supported our positions because, as you know, we have unions and non-unions in many of our municipalities. And we have blended together writing letters both to the federal, provincial level, indicating that at some point, municipalities are going to need some degree of assistance moving forward. Because of the basis, we're not entitled to run deficits in our when budgets do come. And what does that look like for all of us moving forward? And again, we have implications, but again, my implications aren't Toronto or they're not Peel District. They're in the multi-millions of dollars. So ours will be a concern, as will Northumberland County. We're looking at the county as well. But the question to be asked is, there's no one who's going to escape this one in the province of Ontario.
Right. Talk to us a bit about town-owned buildings and the cost to run those during this, like the CCC Venture 13 market building. What happens during this time where the doors are closed, but still got to run heat and AC?
Well, at this point, I give Mr. Davey credit. He made a determination. Again, it's a guesstimate, maybe a good guesstimate. Can we run those facilities at 50%, 30%, 75%? So he did an estimation of what it would be to have those amounts based on that they still have to run even though the buildings are closed. And at this point, our facilities are closed to the public at this point in time. And we had those figures before us. If it stays true to the picture, then yes, we have some savings going forward. And again, that's a good news story because we can apply that against areas where we don't have savings. As I shared with you, the restructuring of service areas, the PPE equipment, the amount of IT overtime, staff overtime to do certain jobs, the redeployment. So I consider it a yin and a yang. In other words, there is going to have to be a balance here moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And these buildings, like nothing is happening at Venture 13. The only thing that's going on in that building right now, are the police services still operating on the second floor?
They're fully independent. They're operating not at the full capacity they were because of COVID-19. And we are restructuring by motion of council Venture 13 to allow Northumberland Hills Hospital at this point to set up a specialized facilities, again, to meet the need coming out of COVID. So it's not operating as we would normally operate a Venture 13. It's not operating as we normally operate our economic development office. And therefore, there we go. It comes back with those plus and minuses.
We know definitely summer's coming and we have our first heat warning already, a little early this year for a heat warning. Are there plans or discussions about cooling centers and what's going to be able to happen to operate those safely?
Yes, and good question, York, because you must have read that I just received from the health unit the other day the risk of a heat warning, and we're taking that to heart, and so that will be discussed again tomorrow. We do have cooling centers within Cobourg and Northumberland, and the question is, during COVID, how do we best adapt those facilities to meet the needs of the individuals who require it? So that will come up for discussion because I'm sure we're going to have other days based on the health regulation that we're going to have that accessible to the public. And the question is, how do we do that?
Right. Exactly. Talk to us a little bit about before we wrap up about council and how your council members are doing. I know a few of them are very active on social media. They're staying busy. How is it with council right now?
Well, council certainly has been active. I do want to give all members of council credit. Not only are we dealing with ongoing issues that are striking all of us in our roles and responsibilities with COVID-19, but at the same time, under each department, um, we're still doing the business of the municipality. So for example, if you looked at this week's agenda, you will see that the Northumberland County will be presenting regarding the Golden Plow Lodge and the new museum and archive. And that is such a significant project. It's over $100 million. I would expect that would be a strong interest to perhaps anybody in Cobourg or Northumberland County, and that's being presented Monday night.
Right.
So,
And I guess we're refining through this. I mean, with all the extra COVID stuff that has to be done, the business of the town still has to continue. And I think I just want to say personal hats off to what I've seen from you and the entire council and town staff. You've been watching Municipal Matters here on your TV. I'm your host, York Bellsmith. We will see you next time.